Hey, what's good, self-direct investors? I hope you're all doing great, and I want to welcome you back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jordan. I'm the mind behind Make More Capital, and today we're coming at you with a midweek update in the world of cannabis. Now, before we jump in, if you enjoy this video or you learn something, please just leave a like on it as it really helps out my channel. And of course, if you want to learn how to take advantage of this generational investment opportunity, subscribe below so that you don't miss any future videos. Then there's plenty of content for you to go back, rewatch, and educate yourself with. I've tried to put all the news and facts in one place so that you can watch episodes over time to learn about the evolution of the industry, identify top companies that you keep seeing pop up, and take advantage whenever you're ready. And today we're going to start with Green Thumb Industries, as they are the first of the Tier 1 MSOs to report their fourth quarter and full year 2021 results. So if we just walk through the highlights for the quarter ended December 31st, 2021, first thing to note is that for their fourth quarter, revenue increased 4.2% sequentially and 37.4% year over year to $243.6 million. And while it does look like the growth is slowing down, it's because it is, but I wouldn't blame that on Green Thumb and their inability to operate effectively. I would blame that on New Jersey, because if New Jersey had competent individuals running their state program and were able to launch, let's say 9 months ago or 6 months ago or even 3 months ago, this would have been a completely different story. So it's worth considering that. Next, we walk through 6 consecutive quarter of positive GAAP net income, delivering $22.8 million or positive 10 cents per basic and diluted share, with an adjusted operating EBITDA of $76 million or 31.2% of revenue for this last quarter. Their 8th consecutive quarter of positive cash flow from operations, which is considerable because in time fundamentals will matter. Well, they finished the quarter with $230.4 million of cash on hand, and the company entered Minnesota through the acquisition of Leafline Industries. So while they've not seen the benefits of that acquisition yet, it's worth noting that, as I'll report later on in the story, that Minnesota has not been allowed to sell flower up until March 1st. They passed a law back in 2021. That law has gone into effect as of yesterday, and that should help sales down the line. Now, for highlights for the full year ended December 31st, 2021, their total revenue increased 60.5% year over year to $893.6 million, so that's considerable, while their GAAP net income of $75.4 million or a positive 34 cents per basic share compared with GAAP net income of $15 million or 0.7 in the prior year of 2020, I should say, and adjusted operating EBITDA expanded 71.4% to $307.8 million or 34.5% of revenue, as they end the year with a strong balance sheet and disciplined capital allocation to support continued future growth. And so you can pause to read the management commentary from CEO Ben Kovler, but I do have a clip lined up in a moment. Otherwise, you can grab the link below to read all of this information if you're interested, especially if you're invested in Green Thumb. But otherwise, I just want to highlight on what they're doing with their consumer packaged goods business across the states, getting their brands into other dispensaries, as well as their retail distribution business, as the lack of change at the federal level doesn't mean much because this is a state-led story, and so they're focusing on legal states where they can expand. So we've got their business down to Nevada, and then from Nevada down to the bottom if you want to pause to read. And then I mainly just want to scroll down to the numbers and compare year over year whether or not Green Thumb is a fundamentally healthy company. And as we can see, they certainly are heading in the right direction despite having both hands tied behind their back. So if we look 12 months ended December 31st, comparing 2020 to 2021, as the revenue went from $556 million in 2020 up to $893 million in 2021, and that is without New Jersey, despite the fact that Green Thumb is very well positioned to capitalize on that state once they do finally launch adult use sales. Now, if we look at their cost of goods sold, or how much it costs for them to make that revenue, it did increase to $401 million, up from $252, but if we compare year over year, that's about an increase of just under $150 million. But at the same time, if we compare their gross profit year over year, they increased their gross profit in 2021 up to $491 million, almost $500 million, up from $304. And if we compare the cost of goods sold to the gross profit, they increased their gross profit by about $185 million compared to the increase of cost of goods sold, which is less than $150 million. So I wanted to note that. If we look at their expenses, which includes their selling and marketing costs, plus general and administrative costs like paying their employees, in 2020 they spent $198 million, while in 2021 they spent $277 million, which is less than $100 million more than they spent last year, which I'd say is fairly good if you're spending more, but then less than $100 million more year over year in order to bring in $200 or $300 million more in revenue. So that's pretty significant, leaving them with a positive income from operations of $214 million for 2021, which is significantly more than the $106 million that they brought in 2020. And if we scroll down, we can see that net income attributable to Green Thumb Industries was a positive $75.4 million, up from $14.3 million last year, for a positive net income of 34 cents a share, up from 0.07 cents a share. And so just wanted to show you all that. Obviously, you can grab the link below if you wanted to walk through it more, but I think this is a very good quarter from Green Thumb, especially given the circumstances that many of the states that we thought would launch sooner than later have not. And since they haven't, that growth is still to come. And so on to this one from Bloomberg as they interview Ben Kovler.
not focused so much on today's stock price. The best thing I can say is, short-term voting machine, long-term weighing machine. And so today we're being voted off the island, but we're over time trying to build the meatiest company that has the longest term weight that'll create value for all of our stakeholders. And we really think we've put the pieces on the board to execute into the U.S. demand growth curve. It's really maybe in inning 2 of a decade-long story.
And Ben, I mean, not to harp too much on the stock price, but it is fascinating to me that if you look at how analysts are rating your company, you have 20 buy recommendations, 0 holds, 0 sells. The average price target is about 117% upside from its current price, but still your stock is down almost 46% over the past year. What are investors missing?
I think it's a great opportunity for the buyers. We think there's a lot of value to be created over 3 to 5 years.
For sure.
Remember, this is U.S. cannabis. So it doesn't trade on the New York Stock Exchange because the rules don't allow us to trade there. It's hard for the average investor to access the stock. You can't buy it on Robinhood. And there's a lot of misinformation out there in the market. So it ends up being a pretty thin sort of stock that's a little bit illiquid. We are focused on the business, not the stock. We're focused on the stock when we sell equity. So if I was a shareholder, you might look at what we did in 2021, which was sell $160 million of stock at about $33 US a share, raise $250 million of equity at the lowest cost of capital in the industry. And now we put our head down and we're going to execute on that. And what happens in the short term is less impactful for us.
How do you
We believe states,
yeah, go ahead, Ben.
Sorry, just real fast. We believe states like Virginia, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, all of which have adult use recreational programs coming that have not started, is a monstrous new bull market cycle essentially for cannabis in the US that'll continue to propel what is now a $25 billion industry up over $50 billion. And you talk about stocks and things, we think 25 billion to 50 billion of annual revenue should create approximately 50 billion more of market cap. So that's how we're thinking about this over 3 to 5 years. And we don't see any stopping that demand from the American consumer.
Well, Ben, I wonder how you execute on this strategy with regulatory uncertainty on the federal level here. You mentioned a handful of individual states, and the regulatory environment is such that you have to make changes based on state to state to adhere to whatever is legal and not legal in one state versus another state. President Biden is set to give his State of the Union address tonight. Certainly we know that it's going to focus a lot on high prices for consumers. I'm sure he will mention the war in Ukraine right now. But despite the fact that proponents of legalization of marijuana have been pushing it for years, do you think we're going to hear anything from him on a federal legalization of marijuana?
Well, the most important thing for me, for us, for our business, for our people, there are 40,000 Americans sitting in jail right now for marijuana offenses that should be out of jail. 4,000 of those are in federal prison, and the president in one motion could get them out of jail. It makes no sense for us to have a business where we're all gainfully employed, where people are behind bars for essentially the same thing. But I've learned that common sense and logic are more difficult in DC. We are focused on the state-to-state markets because of a couple key things. Monstrous tax revenue. For example, Illinois will create $500 million of taxes this year, far more than alcohol. Monstrous job growth. Essentially, cannabis is an economic job stimulus package for these states that have not had this kind of capital investment or jobs. So the tidal wave of taxes and jobs are very important in capital markets. And so that's why we see a lot of momentum for this market.
And let's focus on the state level markets, because your fourth quarter revenue, you generated revenue from 15 states. Your most recent state that you expanded to was Minnesota late last year. What are you viewing next? Where are you going to go?
We see a tremendous amount of opportunity within the platform now. So Minnesota, you mentioned about 6 million people live in the state. Today is the first day any medical patient in Minnesota can buy flower. That's a product that people like for medical patients. So it's just the beginning of the opening up of prohibition in the state of Minnesota. Virginia just started earlier this year. So we're seeing sort of the opening up of the rest of the country. But it's still the Southeast where there's not a lot of cannabis reform, and there's a lot of opportunity for new folks to get into the industry and create wealth. You can change a lot of the economic cycle by creating wealth in new entrepreneurs.
And that is why we accumulate and patiently wait for that opportunity to unfold. So thank you, Ben. And then just wanted to share this one from Cannavestments, who is run by Nick Gastovich, who's an early investor in Green Thumb, Cresco, and some of the other MSOs. But he's trained in finance, whereas I'm not. And so while I like to just give you the highlight through the press release, he goes deeper into the comprehensive income statement. So he adds good but mixed results from GTI here, with an 11th straight beat on consensus rev, but a dip in operating margins as pre-revenue capital expenditure spend and well-documented price compression in key markets weighed on profitability metrics. So he adds his thoughts, and so while there's a big picture here, he clips them down into two shorter ones. So you can pause to read if you're just interested in learning a little bit more from his insights, especially if you happen to be invested in Green Thumb yourself as well. So thank you, Nick, for that one. On to some other tweets from Todd Harrison. So thank you, Todd, for sharing. This is Shooter McGinley, his February update on U.S. cannabis, a valuation update apparently. So you can pause to read if you're interested in what Needham has to say. On to this one from Todd Harrison, sharing us what Jeffries has to say on U.S. cannabis. So thank you, Todd, as well for sharing this. U.S. review, exceptional growth at depressed prices is a critical catalyst near. That could be New Jersey. And so just wanted to share this one as insights look at exceptional growth at depressed prices. Legislative catalyst may be imminent. Honeymoon period over in high price margin East Coast, while adding their top pick is Cresco, ticking the long-term boxes, focusing on brand. And so that is it for Jeffries. Thank you, Todd. And then lastly, Todd again sharing what Roth has to say on U.S. cannabis. So that's another investment firm. So keep in mind, this is not advice. This is just investment firms sharing their view on what they think might come. But they're highlighting fourth quarter 2021 MSO preview, expect flat results and tempered 2022 guidance outlooks. While MSO valuations are compelling ahead of the second half of 2022, obviously be more compelling if New Jersey could get their act together and launch that sooner than later. Well, lastly, just wanted to share this one from TobyChannabis to end this off and remind you all that yes, we are just still very, very early, because if we look at the current disclosed institutional ownership across U.S. cannabis and other select sectors, we can see that U.S. ancillary, 37.4% of ownership is from institutions. Canadian cannabis, 18.4% is from institutions. Big tech, 70% of ownership is from institutions, while big consumer, 46.8%, leaving U.S. cannabis with a measly 4.9% of institutional ownership. And that is where big opportunity for the capital to flow in once we get some sort of safe banking plus, which is the safe harbor language and green light for U.S. investors to finally be able to invest in this sector. And so this comes from Jeffries as well, just if you're curious. And so in other news out of states, just wanted to highlight again, as Minnesota does begin selling medical cannabis flower as of yesterday, March 1st. So this is a big step in the right direction, as many patients want flower and they would much prefer flower as opposed to an oil or concentrate. And that's again just personal preference, but this will also likely help drive sales in Minnesota. And so I'm not going to go through it, but you can grab the link below if you're interested. While Politico came out with this article saying, hey, get ready for the Northeast to become cannabis country, as New Jersey is likely to start sales first, but New York is poised to become the nation's weed capital. And while this may be a catchy headline for those not in the know, for us in the know that have been waiting for this for a very long time, the good news is a lot of the waiting and delays behind us, as Governor Murphy of New Jersey did announce last week that adult use sales should start within weeks, first through medical dispensaries that are already established in the states that belong to MSOs. And so just a bit more detail here, as New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, with a combined population of 33 million, that's a fact, are scrambling to open recreational markets in the coming months. Now let me correct this, because New York's not going to open until 2023. Connecticut likely won't open until potentially August or September of 2022. But yes, New Jersey might actually be opening in the coming months, and we've been waiting all year for this. As they add millions of other East Coast residents in neighboring states will suddenly find themselves within an easy drive of legal weed. While this is all coming, which is great news, I just had to add a bit of context because it's not all coming soon, unless you're going by Chuck Schumer's definition of the word soon. On to this one from MJ Biz Daily, as California localities extend tax relief to cannabis companies in absence of state action. And since state lawmakers have been slow to lower cannabis taxes, local governments throughout California are scrambling to grant tax relief to cannabis businesses. And the tax rollbacks by cities and counties mainly reflect lobbying from industry organizations as well as local residents and businesses. And they argue that taxation at all levels of the supply chain is simultaneously choking cannabis companies' ability to stay afloat while strengthening the illicit market. And we've seen them talk about this for about a year now. And so it's good to see that at least local governments and municipalities are taking action, since state lawmakers do not want to budge. As the rush to grant tax relief began a couple years ago and has since accelerated, because obviously as time goes on, these legal companies operating in a legal state want to ensure that their businesses can sustainably grow over time and not get crushed out by the illicit market due to the fact that state lawmakers don't want to do anything. And so just for some context as well, in January, Governor Newsom pledged tax reform, though he was light on the details. So basically he talked, didn't do anything. While 4 bills at the state level addressing cannabis taxation have been introduced in the past few weeks, which include Assembly Bill 2792, AB 2506, Senate Bill 1281, and SB 1293. For example, SB 1281 appears to be the most comprehensive, and among other things, it would eliminate the cultivation tax and reduce the excise tax to 5%. With constituents screaming for relief, localities are not waiting for any state tax changes to kick in, especially considering that such legislative actions wouldn't take effect until 2023 at the earliest. So good to see, again, local municipalities taking action since state lawmakers won't. So hopefully this will help the situation in California. As Rhode Island lawmakers unveil a cannabis legalization bill after months of negotiation. So good to see progress out of Rhode Island sooner than later, as lawmakers from both chambers on Tuesday unveiled a much-anticipated bill to legalize cannabis in the Ocean State, a move that comes about a month after Governor Dan McKee included a proposal to end cannabis prohibition as part of his annual budget plan. While Senators Joshua Miller and Rep. Scott Slater introduced the new legislation, which would create a system of licensed businesses to produce and sell cannabis while allowing adults 21 and older to purchase and possess up to an ounce. They could also grow up to 6 plants at home, 3 of which could be mature, and the allowable possession limit for cannabis stored in a given household would be maxed at 10 ounces. So for a little bit more information as well, legalization of possession of up to 1 ounce would begin October 1st, 2022. And so that would start this year, which is great to see out of Rhode Island, and the sales would start then too, though it'd be initially limited to existing medical cannabis dispensaries that pay a fee to operate as a hybrid medical recreational retailer, while possession of more than 1 ounce, but up to 2 ounces for adults 18 and older would be decriminalized, with people facing a civil penalty without the threat of jail time. And so if you are from Rhode Island or you want to learn more, they do actually attach the bill here, so you could grab the link and go through this if you'd like. On to some other news from Marijuana Moment, as most Ohio voters would support cannabis legalization at the ballot, which is good news as they plan to put that on the ballot, as polls find as lawmakers are forced to tackle the issue finally. And thankfully, as a slim majority of Ohio voters would support cannabis legalization at the ballot, according to a new poll that comes as the legislature is being forced to consider the reform this session following an activist-led signature gathering drive. Now, the survey from Emerson College found that 50.4% of Ohio voters are in favor of enacting adult use legalization, compared to 39.7% who remain opposed and 10% who are undecided. So while the majority is slim, do keep in mind that this could be the 50.4% of Ohioan voters that had the courage to tell the truth on this survey. And obviously we'll just have to wait to November to see if that is a different story. While the bipartisan demographic breakdown is largely consistent with past polling on the issue in states across the country, as Democrats were likely to favor legalization 66.2%, followed by independents 50%, and Republicans at 36.3%. While 3 and 4 New Hampshire residents also support legalizing cannabis, with bipartisan majorities backing the proposed state-run model, which I still think could be the fastest way to scrap 280E as unconstitutional as well if this gets approved. So the Granite State poll, published by the University of New Hampshire on Friday, found that 74% of residents in the state feel that prohibition should end. In a separate question, 68% said they support a bill that passed the House this month to have the State Liquor Commission exclusively conduct sales, a proposal that has raised some concerns among advocates and stakeholders. If we take a look at the chart, and so obviously you can pause to read, but 79% of Democrats, 68% of independents, and 56% of Republicans say they back the unique form of approach. So good news out of New Hampshire, and hopefully they'll make some progress there. Well, this was an interesting study I wanted to highlight from Marijuana Moment, as college students who use cannabis show signs of greater motivation compared to non-users. Study finds, again, very counterintuitive and a big blow to the prohibitionist argument, as researchers are again challenging the idea that people who smoke cannabis lack motivation, with a recent study suggesting that the opposite may be true. The study, published in the Journal of Experimental and Clinical Psychopharmacology, tested the stereotype by recruiting 47 college students, 25 frequent cannabis consumers, and 22 non-users, and asking them to participate in a series of behavioral assessments known as effort expenditure for rewards tasks. And the results provide preliminary evidence suggesting that college students who use cannabis are more likely to expand effort to obtain reward, even after controlling for the magnitude of the reward and the probability of reward receipt, they wrote. Thus, these results do not support the amotivational syndrome hypothesis. And although there was not a significant difference between cannabis use groups, there was a medium-sized effect, lending consistent support for an association between cannabis use and greater high-effort choices. Or in other words, frequent cannabis consumers were actually more likely than the control group to select tasks that signal higher levels of motivation. And someone ought to tell the governor of South Dakota this, because she simply does not want to change her views regardless of the facts. As Kristi Noem is quoted saying, "I'm not in favor of recreational cannabis. I still believe I haven't seen anybody get smarter from smoking dope. And I don't think anyone in their right mind would call cannabis dope anymore." And that just goes to show either she's being paid to hold these views or she's really ignorant and doesn't want to look at the new facts to change them. And while we did get news that the South Dakota House actually struck down a recent lawmaker, the good news is that South Dakota lawmakers revive a cannabis legalization bill in a smokeout vote a day after committee defeat. And so this is hilarious as I take you through it. A coalition of South Dakota House lawmakers on Tuesday agreed to revive a bill to legalize cannabis one day after a committee soundly defeated it, probably at the influence of the governor, using a legislative maneuver known as a smokeout to bring the legislation to the floor. The Senate passed SB 3 last week, but it seemed all but certain that it would no longer advance following a defeat in the House State Affairs Committee on Monday. Activists didn't give up the fight, however, and rallied 24 members of the House to bring the issue to the floor despite the committee setback. And then get this, House Speaker Spencer Ghosh requested that members wishing to revive the legalization bill stand up. And when enough members stood up, he quipped that, "Ladies and gentlemen, we just smoked out a weed bill." And I find that absolutely hilarious. Adding, "This is an encouraging outcome today." Matthew Swish, director of South Dakotans for Better Cannabis Laws, told Marijuana Moment, "It's clear that members of the South Dakota House of Representatives are listening to their constituents who are demanding that the will of the people be restored." So now the House floor action on the Senate passed bill is expected to happen on Wednesday today, so I'll update you. And that would require a simple majority of 36 votes to pass the chamber. And so on Sunday, I'll have an update for you. But lastly, unfortunate news out of Virginia, as apparently the Virginia House Committee kills a bill to begin cannabis sales this year. And so while the Dems initially set the launch date in 2024, the Republicans that came in passed a new bill that would actually get sales to start in September of this year, which would have been very obviously beneficial for the market in Virginia in eliminating the illicit market there. Sadly, for some reason, a House committee has killed the bill. Now, this does not mean that they might not take a page from South Dakota's book and try to smoke out, this decision, but as of right now, it has been shut down. As a House of Delegates subcommittee Monday voted down legislation that would have allowed recreational cannabis sales to begin in September. The legislation, which had passed a Democratic-controlled Senate last week, died on a party line vote with Republicans opposing. "I think this is a bigger issue than we can correct in 2 weeks' time," said Dell, Jeff Campbell, R. Smith, and Democrats on the panel urged their GOP colleagues to reconsider, because the longer we have to wait for a regulated market, the harder it will be to compete with the illicit market, said Dell, Don Adams, D. Richmond. And that is 100% true. This is the biggest takeaway from all of the states experimenting over time, that the longer we wait to have a regulated market, the harder it will be to compete with that illicit market. And if Virginia lawmakers do want to work in the best interests of their constituents as opposed to their donors, then they might want to take a page from South Dakota in considering smoking out this decision too. But there's plenty of time from now until 2024 for this to change as well, and hopefully some of the lawmakers will find some common sense solutions from now until then. But that is it for today's episode, folks. I want to thank you so much for tuning in, and I really hope you got some value out of it. What did you think of the stories mentioned? Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or suggestions, and I'd be happy to address them. But besides that, if you enjoyed this video or you learned something, please just leave a like on it. Subscribe below if you don't want to miss any future videos, and I will catch you on Sunday for This Week in Cannabis News with Curaleaf's earnings that come Thursday after market close at 5 p.m. Have a great week, everybody.